Hi, this is
Yeah.
Scott Silverman, and I'm here today, January 30th, 2026, with Zane Stein, who's going to grace the Florida North Atlantic Chapter with a workshop on February 21st from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. with an hour break. And the topic of the workshop will be, well, Zane, I'm going to let you say what the topic is.
Well, basically, it's about Chiron and Chariklo and how the two of them work together to bring about healing. That's the gist of it. Um, we've seen Chiron being quoted as the wounded healer for several decades, but Chiron himself was partially healed after he met Chariklo and they became husband and wife. So uh, the wounded healer who couldn't heal himself was partially healed by Chariklo, and there's an element of that in in the stories that we will go through when we uh, have the workshop.
And so he was basically healed by the power of love. Now, I want to make sure you're saying the word Chariklo, because some people I hear say Chariklo, and I just wondered, I don't want to be corrected at the next UAC myself. This is,
Well, all right. Um, I've actually looked into this, and uh, when it comes down to, we're not even actually saying Chiron properly, but we've westernized it. So like my name, Western name is Zane, but it's derived from my Hebrew name, which was Zanvil. So we can say Chiron because that's what we're saying now. We can say Cariclo, which is basically the actual pronunciation. It's like a cross between a CH and a K. Cariclo.
Chariklo. And how do you say, what's the correct way to say Chiron?
It's also the CH Chiron. But I'm perfectly happy for you to say Chiron because that's what everybody else is saying.
But what should it be in an ideal world?
Like I said, it would be Chiron or if you think of the way the German or the Hebrew saying like a sound Chiron, something like similar to that.
Well, the first I've had people in the early days of people working with Chiron, they say Chiron. I mean, I've heard it pronounced
Yeah.
a lot of different ways. So here on the screen, one hopes we see all the information our viewers need to know to decide to come to your workshop. As you see, February 25th, 1st, 2026, 9 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with a break tentatively scheduled from 11:15 to 11:45 a.m. for lunch. And it's the cost of the workshop is $40 for members of the NCGR and $55 for non-members. You can go to the website, you can go to the site astrologyfla.com and click on the pull down page for Zane Stein, Chiron, and Chariklo. Uh, and I think that covers those details pretty well. I'm going to stop sharing.
Just so you know, the picture there was me up until a few months ago when the weather started turning warm. I shaved my beard off.
I've seen you actually, as you'll see when I pull up some of these slides, we have a good rogues gallery of you with many different kinds of beards. So I like it. Okay, let's get rid of that. All right, so we'll get started. First of all, oh yes, I just wanted to say if you go to astrologyfla.com and navigate to the appropriate page, you can register. Zane, can someone sign up for this workshop on your website as well? Okay. Zane, when and where were you born?
I was born in a hospital in Philadelphia called Germantown Hospital. And
In Pennsylvania?
yes, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the Germantown section of Philadelphia, which is why it was called Germantown Hospital. And that hospital no longer exists. But back in those days, it was a very big hospital. I was born on the 17th of June, 1951. And my birth time is 11:43 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But if you bring up my birth date in a computer program, it wants to change it to daylight savings time. And so there's a very short story I need to tell you here. Prior to 1976 in Pennsylvania, the government of the state required all times, birth times, to be recorded in standard time year round, which means that even though the clock in the bell tower or the local store was daylight savings time, your birth certificate was supposed to have the standard time. But some hospitals ignored that. So if you live in Pennsylvania and you were born before 1976 in the summertime, you actually need to research the hospital you were born in to be sure how your time was reported. Because my time was reported 11:43. It didn't say DST or EST. It just said 11:43 p.m. I had to contact Germantown Hospital and find out that they were reporting it in standard time.
Now, did you initially use the wrong chart and feel that it wasn't?
No. When I first did my chart, I had a friend who taught me my initial astrology. She was a Scorpio with a Scorpio moon, very, very, very intense person. But she did my chart, and she took one look at me and said, "You don't have an Aquarius rising." So she rectified it. She said, "It's got, it's got to be EST. You've got to have Pisces risings." So that I've been working with a Pisces rising chart basically from the beginning.
Good, good. How did you become an astrologer, Zane? The short version.
The short version. So I was so the same person I was telling you about. I was a student at Pennsylvania State University, which is smack dab in the middle of the state of Pennsylvania, in the middle of a valley surrounded by mountains, and it was an off day. I didn't have any classes. I was walking through the student union building, and in the distance, I saw a very, very attractive girl all by herself. And I was not attached. So I'm a Gemini. I just said, what can I do to see if I can introduce myself to her? So I walked up to her, trying to think of a line. And she was sitting there looking at a book, then copying something into a circle, looking at a book and copying something into a circle. And I said, now at this point, my desire to meet her was superseded by my Gemini curiosity. I want to know what the heck she's doing. So I said, "May I ask what you're doing?" And she said, "I'm working on an astrology chart." So I said, "You don't really believe in that stuff, do you?" So I told you she had moon in Scorpio and sun in Scorpio. She turned away from the book, looked me. I swear her eyes went straight through my head to the back of my head, and she said, "What's your birth date?" And she started, she looked me up in the ephemeris and the stuff. And after about 10 minutes, I realized the stuff she was telling me she couldn't possibly know. And that's how I got into astrology in the first place. I studied with her for a while. That summer, I went home.
What was her first name?
Beverly.
Beverly, okay.
Beverly. We called her Bev. Uh, that summer, I went home from Penn State, which is a couple hour drive from where my parents were in Philadelphia, and I started studying on my own. I started doing charts for everybody I knew, friends, relatives, total strangers I'd meet hanging around the square in Philadelphia. By the time I got back in autumn to Penn State again, I knew more about astrology than Beverly did. And
Amazing.
then she started asking me questions, and I started teaching her. And that's how I became an astrologer. And the following summer, I did my first chart for remuneration. I had a friend who had a record store, and she said she would give me my choice of any record album in the store in exchange for doing her chart. So that's my first paid customer. I got a Led Zeppelin album for my first payment.
Do you remember which one?
Yeah, it's the one with Houses of the Holy.
I thought it was House of the Holy. Isn't that funny? That's what I was thinking. So now I know who your first teacher was, so I don't have to ask about that. But what teacher had the most indelible impact upon your astrological practice and education?
It's a very good question, and I've never taken an actual attend class with a teacher, but I have learned from a lot of teachers. And the one that had the greatest impact, the one I've learned the most from, became my mentor and also later my publisher, was Al H. Morrison.
I thought it might
Al
be
was,
Al. Yeah.
yeah, Al was a New York astrologer who basically knew everybody in the astrology community. He was born in 1916, which is the same year my mother was born. And so he was like a father figure to me in a lot of ways. But he would be one of these people that Al would speak his mind, no bullshit, and he would go right to the point. So when he had something to tell you, you listen because you knew he wasn't trying to make you feel good or whatever. And knowing that he was getting to the point every single time he spoke, I learned a lot.
And with and Al, of course, corresponded, did teaching with people all over the world. He corresponded with many of the leading astrologers. And I was lucky enough
Yes.
to spend an afternoon with him. I went to the 19th Street apartment. My friend Karen Christino, friend and colleague, brought me there. And, Karen later edited a collection of Al's writings, The Best of Al
Yeah.
H. Morrison, which I think every astrologer should have in their library. No, I
No
think Al
comment.
was one of the great astrologians, and he taught me that word, astrologian, of the 20th century. And I still, to this day, learn things from him when I find a new piece of writing or a new recording. Yeah.
I need to just uh, stories pop in my mind. I needed to say this one. Now,
Freeform jazz, it's fine. Yeah.
I went to his apartment many, many times because New York was only a short drive from Philadelphia, so it was very, very easy. And once he had this long table, and I remember one time I was sitting at this table with Al, and we were
Resume.
yeah, we were sitting at this table, and we were working on something. I don't remember what, but suddenly I saw him and me changed. I we were ourselves, but we were different people. And we were both astrologers, but we were like medieval astrologers. And I said, Al, I don't know whether I'm hallucinating or whatever, but I just saw you and me as astrologers in a past life. And he said, and that surprises you why?
There was a timeless quality about Al, so that doesn't surprise me. The other thing, he was firmly convinced he was the reincarnation of W.H. Cheney, right? The 18th century astrologer who many of us know as the father of his illegitimate. W.H. Cheney was the father of the writer Jack London. And while Jack London and W.H. Chaney did not have a relationship, there's still much to be learned from the work of W.H. Chaney. And you can still obtain his books from Philip Graves' library. There are scans available. Do you have any favorite astrological books or writers, Zane?
All-time favorite writer, astrological writer is Dane Rudyard.
David who?
Dane
Oh,
Rudyard.
Dane Rudyard, yes.
Yeah. Um, I fell in love with. I've read like most of his books and a lot of his articles, but my favorite book was The Astrology of Personality, and this is the first book where I ever saw the Sabian symbols. He had reformulated the ones that Mark Edmund Jones had originally published to try and fit them more into a current framework. And that was the first time I ever saw them. In the middle of that book was the Sabian symbols, and I fell in love with that. Um, and also in the same book, there's one place where he drew a picture of a solar system, and he had three moons. One moon traveled around the Earth. There was another moon, which basically would have been the asteroid belt, and there was another moon, which was between Saturn and Uranus. And so that led me to write to Al, I mean, to Dane, and just ask him if by any chance that was Chiron. And he said, well, at my age, I'm a little bit too old to start researching something new, but from what I've seen about Chiron, it definitely seems to fit my idea for that moon. And we started up a correspondence, which we continued until he passed away. But this is a man. I'll sum up why I like his works in one thing he said.
And wait, for our people who are watching that are younger, Dane Rudyard was one of the great astrological figures of the 20th century and came to astrology through a musical career as well. He was a well-known 20th century composer, and he is still a major influence out there in the global astrological community.
Yeah, he said, so the one thing he said once is that transits don't happen to a person; the person happens to the transits.
That became
And
one of
and
the landmarks of humanistic astrology.
yeah,
Event Events don't happen to people, people happen to events. Was it kind of like that?
yeah,
Yeah.
something like that. And to me, that was a life changer. That it turned me around. I looked at things differently from that point on. He wasn't only a musician, by the way. He had also done a little bit of acting in movies.
Oh, what can you think of a movie he was in? That would be fun to
No,
watch.
they were
Yeah.
small parts, and he didn't stay with that. But the idea always struck me that if you just say the word Renaissance man, you're talking about Dane Rudyard.
He's amazing. The astrology of personality, I believe, wasn't that the book that introduced the idea of the mystic rectangle?
Yeah,
Do you have a mystic rectangle?
depends upon
Ah,
whether I put asteroids in or not. If I put asteroids in, I do. This is what I wanted to see if I had a copy of the book handy, but oh well, doesn't matter. It takes too long to look for it. Anyway, there are a lot of other astrologers that I've really enjoyed and gotten a lot of their stuff from. Debbie's book, she only published one book, Debbie Kempton Smith, and that was called Secret from Stargazer's Notebook.
yep.
And there's some absolutely amazing tidbits in there. And she has such a fun style. It was like you're learning and not even realizing you're learning because you're having so much fun reading her
It's
book, you
so
know?
much fun. And if you have a high IQ, I always say, Debbie was a member of Mensa. The smarter you are, the more irresistible. You find her book, Secrets from the Stargazer's Notebook. Now, I mean, I know I mentioned to you in passing, the first time I ever read your name was in her book. She mentioned Zane Stein, and the first time I read about Chiron, the first time I read about L.H. Morrison, and uh, there was and the Void of Course Moon I learned from her book. So that book was responsible for bringing me into astrology, basically. I read that one book, and when I was done, I was a baby astrologer, you know? What are three of the most unique features of your natal chart? For instance, I have three hammers of Thor in my natal chart, two out of bounds personal planets, and my Sun and Uranus are both angular, in partile square to one another, and in an antitia relationship. So this is in your chart, what's unusual, what strikes you as unusual or most striking about your chart if you were not you, if you were an astrologer approaching it?
Okay. Um, Probably the most unusual part of my chart because it's uh, so influential in multiple ways is my Mercury. So I'm going to just run down a list of a few things. I've got Mercury in its own sign, Gemini, in its own house, third house. I have it at a critical degree, which means it's strong. I have it conjunct Mars also, which means that it's Mercury on steroids in a lot of ways. I have my Mercury square my ascendant North Node conjunction. Now, if you look at the works of the evolutionary astrologers, a planet that you have square the nodes, they call kind of like a skip step.
Yep.
Yeah, you have to keep going back to this planet over and over again until you learn some lessons. You just see. So Mercury has been a blessing and a curse in my life in that it's given me so much desire to eat knowledge. There was a movie called A Short Circuit years ago about a robot who gets struck by lightning and becomes self-aware. And once he's self-aware, he suddenly has this insatiable urge for information, and he keeps going, input, I need more input. Everything he reads the back of the cereal boxes when he runs out of books and newspapers. Well, I've always identified with that character. It's this unbelievable craving for input, but at the same time, so many times I have done things like stepped on my own tongue, and put my foot in my mouth because my Mercury runs ahead of my sun. It rises before my sun. So my mouth goes before I have a chance to really check the layout of the land sometimes. It's square my ascendant descendant, which means the ruler of my seventh house, Virgo, is square my seventh house. So I'm always having trouble in relationships with communication. It took me until I was in my 70s to realize that I was trying to communicate with the image of the person that I had created.
Amazing. And at which point you started giving workshops on Chiron and Chariklo. Yes, in a sense.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's my Mercury is the number one, and it's also trine my Neptune and sextile my Pluto, and Pluto is my Mercury Neptune midpoint. So it's involved in lots of different things in my chart. Probably the second significant thing to me is the fact that I was born with Chiron at 0 degrees, 1 minute of Capricorn at the top of my chart. Now, if you know anything about the cardinal
I know a lot
points,
about the cardinal axis, and yes,
all
that's
right,
so perfect for you. Yes.
yeah. So um, a friend of mine once, I was talking with him about how I had been one of the primary influences getting the astrological community to look at Chiron, right? That I was like a leader. And he said, well, you didn't give birth to Chiron, but you certainly did midwife it.
Yes, I would agree with that. And
So it's,
remember when I gave you a chance to retort to John Townley's article in the Dwarf Planets issue of Geocosmic Journal, where you had a great article on Eris, where he basically claimed that you came up with most of the keywords for Chiron, and you set him straight that it was a whole group of astrologers that worked together that came up with the keywords and much of the symbolism we use to this day. So you
yeah,
actually were
yeah,
the messenger. You were the messenger.
yeah. When I had been working with Al and a couple other colleagues in the early days of studying Chiron, and we started when it was Object Coal before he named it Chiron. I put together
Oh, that was Kowal after the discoverer Charles Kowal, right?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I put together an idea for a group. I called it the Association for Studying Chiron, and I started soliciting people. Please, please, if you're interested in Chiron, please join. I had people in 6 continents as part of this group submitting their interpretations and their findings, and this is pre-internet, so this is all done by post, by stamped mail. And so a lot of the initial findings on Chiron, I was the person who pulled them together and put them in the newsletter, but they came from all different parts of the world.
Yeah, that's amazing. So was it Al that got you working with Chiron through knowing him, or did you come to know Al through wanting to learn more about Chiron?
Okay, well, actually, neither. Okay, so I had I had a friend who was really into astrology, and he had a car, and I didn't, and he would drive me over the bridge to Princeton, New Jersey, and we would attend the Princeton Society, which was sponsored by Ken Nagus, a very great astrologer in those days. Well, one day, this friend of mine, whose name was Michael, I think, it's been a long time. He said he had a surprise for me. So we're going to go on a road trip, and he wouldn't tell me why. But we went on this road trip, and we went to New York, and we went to this stone building, and we went up the stairs, and there was a woman who I'd never heard of, who was having a publishing party for a book that she had just come out with. Her name was Eleanor Bach, and she the book was on the 4 asteroids, Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta.
Was it the
And one of the
ephemeris that she did? Was it
yes,
the
yes,
yes.
yeah. And one of the people at that room was Al Morrison, and that's where I met him.
And and then somehow
And
through knowing Al, as Al got first
now,
word of Object Kowal.
okay, that's totally a separate story. All right, so I had a mundane job, and I was married to a woman named Alice, and she didn't know anything about astrology other than what she heard from me. But I came home from work one day, and Alice said, I heard they discovered the 10th planet. Now, okay, so I told you how much I'm voracious about knowledge. So I'm like, I tried to get her to pump her for more information, but that's all she could remember. She didn't, she's not an astrologer. She's not an astronomer. She just remembered that part. So after dinner, I went to the library, and I started looking through back issues of newspapers, and they had the New York Times. So I found this story on one of the pages of the New York Times, 10th planet discovered. And I still have a copy of that article somewhere because I bought a copy of the newspaper for myself. But so I read the whole article, and in the article there were two names. There was Charles Kowal,
Yep.
who worked out of the observatory in Pasadena. He was the person who discovered this body. And there was Dr. Brian Marsden, who was the head of the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory's Minor Planet Center, who was collating all the information on this new body. So I wrote to both of them. I must have been a really good Mercury day because surprisingly they both replied. I wrote to Charles Kowal and I asked if he had any idea when he first discovered this body. And he said a little bit before 10 o'clock on 1st of November, 1977. And he just explained how he was looking at slides from October 18th and 19th in what's called a blink microscope. And when you look at these slides side by side, a star doesn't move. But a planet, an asteroid, will look like a little streak when it went back and forth between the two slides. So he first noticed that something was streaking back and forth a little before 10 o'clock. So that was great. I got that information. I was able to do a chart for when this body was discovered. Dr. Marsden, I asked if there's any way I can get its position. I was just curious for where it was. Dr. Marsden sent me, I don't know if you're old enough to remember the old light and dark green striped computer sheets that came from
Yes.
the printouts.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he sent me a printout of what he called a search ephemeris. It was the ephemeris of Chiron's position on and near the date of discovery. It was about 20, 30 days worth of this body's position. And so I knew I could use this, except for one thing. It was in right ascension and declination. And I had never knew how to convert that. So I thought, who do I know who could do this for me? And Al knows everybody. So I wrote a letter to Al. I sent him a photocopy of this. Al was ecstatic. He got a colleague of his who had an old TRS-80 home computer, and she crunched the numbers, converted it to zodiac position, and we found out that Chiron was discovered at 3 degrees 8 minutes Taurus. Over the next several months, I got longer and longer ephemerids from Dr. Marsden. At one point, I told him I was into it for astrology, and he was just totally nonplussed by that. It didn't matter to him because I was interested in doing research, so he didn't care why I wanted it. Unlike some scientists, he was not against astrology. He just didn't understand why anybody believed in it. But so Al, eventually, when we had enough positions, Al published a pamphlet with the ephemeris, and it was like 2 pages, and he included a copy of this Chiron ephemeris in everything that he sent to anybody. Somebody wrote for a void of course moon ephemeris. He put the Chiron ephemeris in there. And on the bottom of the Chiron ephemeris in the back, it had a little blurb about my association for studying Chiron and how to get in touch with me. And so I got a lot of new people studying Chiron because of Al sending out that ephemeris.
And that's how it all began. And Al was amazing about just sending out his photostats, his Xerox copies of anything, right? And if you were on Al's mailing list, you were good to go. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Um,
Yeah.
so this
He,
really
he,
answers my
yeah.
question of how long you've been working with Chiron since the very beginning. What are some of your favorite keywords for Chiron? And as a follow-up, which commonly used keywords for Chiron do you disagree with? Because, people love to remake newly discovered bodies in their own image.
Yeah. Okay. I have a little story I want to tell you, but I'll answer your question first. Um, my actual favorite keyword for Chiron is hole making. WHOL, hole making.
Homemaking,
WHO.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. Which is why my second book I call Chiron Healer and Homemaker. That was my
Yes.
second book. Okay. That is my all-time favorite. It encompasses so much. Um, I also there's an idea of something that defines the smallest thing something can be and still be that. So, like, if I have a molecule of water, it's water. If I break it down into hydrogen and oxygen, it's no longer water, right?
Right.
So, a molecule of water is the smallest uh,
Unit.
thing that,
Atom.
and
Yeah.
an atom, yeah, atom, and I call that a delimiter, in that it defines the smallest or the largest where something uh, stops being something and becomes something else. So that delimiter is another Chiron word.
Delimiter. Delimiter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah, yeah. And I've got a whole long list of keywords. We could probably just do a whole session just on Chiron keywords, but I won't go into that. I
No, because
don't
we have
have.
Chariklo keywords to deal with in a while. Okay. What
Yeah,
story did it bring to mind?
I will tell you that, but I'm going to answer the other half of your question first. Um, I don't have specific keywords that I disagree with so much as I have a focus. There is a group called the Magi Astrology,
I know
right?
them. Yes.
And they've reinvented Chiron to suit their idea. They talk about Chiron being the love aspect,
And
the love planet.
The Cinderella aspect, right?
Yeah,
Chiron Venus.
yeah. And I read the first book that came out, and nowhere in that entire book do they explain where they came up with these interpretations for Chiron, nor in any subsequent book. There isn't saying we have researched it and we've come to this conclusion, or we've asked 1,000 people and 90% of them said this. They stated that this is what Chiron's influence is, and left it up to the reader to assume they knew what they were talking about. To me, that is shoddy astrology. And I even wrote and complained to them, but they didn't deign to respond.
Well,
So
I'll tell you,
it's
it's funny, Zane, because when the first book from the Magic Society came out, Astrology Really Works, they mentioned Chiron in there, but it was on the later books they really went into Chiron. There was a phone number. So I called the phone number. And about 6 months later, I got a phone call from someone from the Magi Society. And we talked for about 2 hours. And he claimed their information came from like Shaolin monasteries and ancient monks, which begs the question, how would the ancient monks know anything about a newly discovered planet? We're not talking about the Dogon and Uranus here, right? We're talking about Chiron discovered in 1977, right?
they had to pick it up with a third. They had to pick it up with their third eye. That's all.
Well, remember, you also talked about you share were kind enough to share with the NCGR Geocosmic Journal some some papers you had, and one thing you talked about was was it Charles Jane? Someone came up with a planet named Charon, like
Jason. No,
Charon, which eventually that name was given to the moon of Pluto, but it was similar to
yeah. Well, Charles Jane actually predicted a body he called Jason,
Jason.
and Jason uh, had an orbit remarkably similar to Chiron's, and there were even similarities as far as I think, if I remember correctly, he even said where the moon's nodes would be when they would discover this planet. He was correct. He was not 100% correct, but this was long before Chiron was discovered. Um, there's two other sources long before Chiron was discovered that predicted its position, its discovery, and a few months before Chiron was discovered, Al published his magazine, which at that time was
CAO
called
Times.
CAO Times,
Yeah.
and the cover had a picture of a crane lifting a, a large globe above the city of New York, and the caption read, Pedestrians watch as a new planet is lifted into the sky." And that was before Chiron was discovered, but the very issue that came out before Chiron's discovery.
And I've actually seen that graphic, that cover, and you actually provided us with a JPEG of it. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. Was there a story you were going to mention?
Yeah, but where was I?
Oh, we'll
I,
go on. We'll go on. It'll
yeah,
come
I
to
don't remember what I was about. The story was in reference to. I always have stories. Maybe it'll come back to me.
it will. Now, for instance, there's so many people that work with Chiron. David Cochran, who now goes by the name Mancuso, has a couple of interesting videos that he's uploaded. David makes videos the way the rest of us blink. I mean, there's just such a great library of videos by Santino/David now on YouTube. I encourage everyone to go watch them. But his research that he did, and he does something associated with the vibrational astrology movement called
Yes.
evidence-based astrology, but he claims Chiron has to do with qualities of charisma and the truth associated with being fully in the present moment. Um,
Okay. All right. Let me clarify that. I can't speak about the charisma, but the second half of what you said is right on. One of the things in the early studies of Chiron that we became aware of, and my logic told me the reason for this is because Chiron orbits between Saturn and Uranus, is that Chiron, you focus on the now. You can't focus on tomorrow because tomorrow hasn't happened yet. You can't focus on the past because you can't change the past. So Saturn is the past, Uranus is the future. Chiron is the stepping stone between the two. If you are truly focusing on Chiron, you are living in the now. Um, you ever, you know who Ram Dass was?
uh, Baba Ram Das, be here now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Well, that be here now, that's the essence of that aspect of Chiron. You know, you're always in the now. You're not. You can't live in the future. You can, if you're psychic, you may see the future, but you don't live in it. And you can't live in the past, although you may try. Your physical body is in the present, and everything you need is in the present. If you can bring your consciousness totally in the present, that's focusing on Chiron. And so I agree with David, definitely with that. Charisma, I don't know.
I'll send you a link to the videos. Now, we're both familiar with the wonderful work of Martha Lang Westcott, and one of the add-ons Martha did to delineating Chiron was she says it has to do with turning points, especially even
Yes.
in mundane charts. So did she get that from you and the group's research or?
Uh, okay. Um, if you read Martha's description of Chiron in her book, a lot of that does come from some of my writings. She basically, it's not that she pilfered it. She was a researcher, and if somebody else had some meanings for one of the asteroids, she would study them and accept them and add them if she found them of value.
If
So
they empirically panned out for her, she's definitely
yes,
someone that did empirical research and observation. Yeah, it
yeah,
does.
yeah, and yeah. So turning point is one of the keywords they use for Chiron. Um, Another one is doorway, and as opposed to a door. Imagine you're standing in front of a house. The door is open. You have one foot in the house and the other foot outside. You're in the doorway. You're not in the house. You're not outside the house. You're both.
You're in a
And
liminal space in between. Yes.
yes, yeah. And so that doorway, which could take you from one world to another, that's Chiron. Um, Chiron, unlike Uranus, doesn't break the door open. Unlike Saturn, it doesn't require you to do hard work to figure out the combination so you can unlock the door. Chiron will quite often show you there's a door when you didn't even realize there is one, and give you insight on how to open and step through it.
And this would be when it's aspecting or conjunct or relating in a major way to another planet in the chart.
Yes.
All right. We'll get back to Debbie for a second. Now, Debbie made a big deal in her book, a wonderful deal about Louise. I think it was Louise Smith, the first and back then only so-called test tube baby, and those were
Yes.
simpler times, as we know, had Chiron rising and thought this was a very significant fact. And she also used to characterize, and I don't know if she was quoting someone else's work, Chiron as an inconvenient benefic. Would
That
you
was
care to
Al.
comment on that?
That was Al's description of Chiron. He called it inconvenient benefic.
What did he mean by that?
Well, benefics traditionally are seen as good, and malefics are seen as bad.
Right, so
Right?
Venus and Jupiter are the benefics, yes.
Yeah, and Mars and Saturn were malefics, and it's a very black and white way of looking at the world, right? But an inconvenient benefic is that it brings benefics, good things to you, but quite often at the most inopportune or inconvenient time. So, you know, um, you might have somebody enter your life and explain to you exactly what you've been doing wrong right before you're getting ready to get on stage to tell them your method. And you realize that what they said is correct and everything you're about to say is wrong. And you're enlightened, but now you can't use what you were about to say because Chiron came along and showed you the truth. It was at the most inconvenient time.
Thanks for explaining that because it's never been entirely clear to me. Could you please briefly explain to us all what you believe the Centaur Chariklo symbolizes in a nativity, and how did you go about researching Chariklo? And was it the group, or was it you first, or was it someone else?
Okay. Uh, I I will tell you that initially, a lot of my research for all these centaurs started off with the group I had, which years ago it was an entirely different group. It was a Yahoo group, which doesn't exist anymore. And I
I
now
was
have a
on it.
centaur.
I was on it.
Yeah.
It was like a mailing list, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Centaurs?
And
Was it the
now,
Centaurs group?
for first, it was Chiron and Friends. That was
Yes.
initially, and then it was the Centaurs, and now I have a group on EO that is called, Centaurs and Trans-Neptunians, but it's evolved. But back when it was Chiron and Friends, I had a lot of people in this group, and we were all studying all these new bodies. As soon as another one was discovered, we'd start studying it. And even before it got its name, and which, interestingly, the first body centaur after Chiron was Pholus. That was a name of a centaur, Pholus.
I remember when
The
the ephemeris came out, and if you see in a slide I'll show later, I actually have a picture of the pamphlet Al did for Pholus. Yes.
Yeah. Now, the following year, a body was came out. I think it was 1992, HA2, something like that. Anyway, so they had. We didn't really have much information, and then when they gave it a number, we were able to do an ephemeris for it, and my colleagues and I, we all started putting this body in charts, and this is where the story gets really interesting. I wrote to Dr. Marsden suggesting that when it's time for this body to be named, a good name for this would be Nessus, based on my research. Unknown to me,
The name of a mythological centaur, right?
yeah. And I'll mention that more in a second. Unknown to me, a colleague of mine in Europe, Robert Van Heeren, sent a letter with the same name for this body, as well as a few others. And a third colleague in a different European country, Dieter Koch, who I think is now with Astrodienst, he sent a letter. So 3 people who did not know the other 2 were sending it, all sent the same suggestion, Nessus, for this body. Now, when I sent it to Dr. Morrison, he wrote back to me and he said, well, normally it's the province of the astronomer who discovers it to name the body, but if he chooses not to, and I will see what I can do to recommend the name Nessus. And so we were all stunned when it was actually named Nessus, based on astronomers. At least the next 4 centaurs discovered were also names submitted by astrologers, and one of them was Chariklo. Okay, so the initial findings, it's all research, my research of my colleagues, but I really got into studying Chariklo for a while because, I tend to put a body in numerous charts as a way of trying to see how it can manifest.
With no
And I came up with
preconceptions, right? With no preconceptions, you just drop it in the chart.
Right.
Yeah.
And I discovered, first thing that I discovered was that in a whole series of people who had major scientific breakthroughs had close Chariklo aspects to personal points of their chart. And then, to make this even more astonishing, I had a few charts of science fiction writers, and I put it in there. And damn, if not every single science fiction writer I had a chart for, no exceptions.
I don't suppose you had Theodore Sturgeon in there, did you?
Yes, I did. Sturgeon is always one of my favorites. Anybody who is at a con and somebody says, "Mr. Sturgeon, do you realize that 90% of science fiction is crud, who replies, son, 90% of everything is crud. That's Theodore Sturgeon. Yes, he was one of the people. So all these science fiction writers, and then I started plugging it into the actors who played in Star Trek, and again, uh, Chariklo started showing up as prominent. I wrote to uh, the gentleman who played the number two to oh
Leonard Nimoy?
no to Picard. What was this? The guy that was
Stryker, Commander Stryker,
yeah
Jonathan something.
Frakes. I wrote
Yeah.
to Jonathan Frakes asking for his birth time, and he wrote back on the bottom of my letter with his birth time. So I had his birth time. Even in his chart, it's prominent. It's in Leonard. It's in Spinner's chart. It's in Nimoy's chart. So we have this body, and I started concluding that one of the things is that Chariklo enables you to step outside a pre configured notions and look at the possibilities outside of what you had your preconceived ideas, right? Because a scientist, one time somebody said to Einstein, can you tell me how you managed to come up with your understandings of the universe, relativity and stuff? You're looking at exactly the same stuff that other scientists have looked at for hundreds of years and not seen. And Einstein's response was something along the lines of, yes, most people go to what they're about to study with preconceived notions of what they're going to find, with like developed film. So they only find what they're what they think they're going to find. I approach things like I have new film in my mental camera, and I have no preconceived notions. So I see what's there. I don't see what I'm looking for. I see what's there, right? And I think that this element, this ability to step outside of your preconceived notions or to step outside what you think should be there and be open to the possibilities beyond that, that is a Chariklo. Another thing about Chariklo, which I've grown to understand later on, is that there's a concept of a sacred space, a place where you're totally safe. So if I have some kind of psychological problem and I go to a therapist and they try to help me by helping me to fit into society, that's not helping me. That's trying to make me something I'm not. But if I go to someone who not only listens to my every word, but makes me feel so totally safe that I can open up and tell them even the most dark, deepest parts of me without fear of judgment, healing can begin. And so that's the other aspect of Chariklo, is this ability to create or show a person this sacred space where they're totally safe, where they can express whatever it is that's the problem.
Be who they are. Yeah.
Yeah,
And this is what,
yeah.
isn't this what lovers do for each other, right?
Yes.
Yes.
When you love somebody and you really love them, rather than when you are infatuated with the projection that you put on them. Yes.
Is it significant when someone has a partile aspect between Chiron and Chariklo in their horoscope or in a composite chart generated with the chart of a significant other?
It's a loaded question because I
I
think that
know, and I apologize. I should have broken it into two.
I actually find it very difficult to see anything as being insignificant. Yes, in that I'll give you a negative something else first, and then I will give you the positive of what you're saying. So
Perfect.
I've been in a relationship where my Chiron was opposition the woman's Venus, and her Chiron was opposition my Venus. Now there's no Chariklo here, right? Just Chiron. And one of the things that we discovered through the entire length of our relationship is that it was like the two of us were always in therapy with each other. We were always confronting our issues. After the relationship finally ended, we both agreed that we grew so much through the relationship, but it was painful because it was more learning how to overcome our deepest wounds at the expense of the relationship. There was pain, there was suffering, there was anger, there was all the negative emotions. That was the Chiron by itself. Sometimes Chiron will, in a relationship by itself with some other person's chart, it's a question of just how much therapy do you want to be involved in the relationship, and how much are you willing to let walls come down without putting another wall up for your own security? When Chiron and Chariklo are connected between two people's charts, it goes back to the Chiron person has a wound, and the Chariklo person allows the Chiron person to feel perfectly safe to share their pain. And this is the healing. And I will tell you the mythological Chiron Chariklo story. You'll see how it relates to this. So, Chiron was a centaur, and there was a wood nymph named Chariklo. Some stories had her being a handmaiden for Athena, but she lived in the forest, and she was perfectly content to be a wood nymph. But one day she spied a clearing Chiron, and she fell instantly in love with this centaur. But she knew that he wouldn't have anything to do with her because she was a wood nymph. So she used her wood nymph magic, and she transformed herself into a centaur and went up to him. And he fell instantly in love with her. So she became a centaur to be with him. Now, what makes this so healing is that when Chiron was born, the very first thing he heard was his mother, who took one look at him and said, "Get this monstrosity out of my sight. I never want to see it again." And his father, who happened to be Saturn or Kronos, had left right after he impregnated his mother. So he was abandoned by his father, rejected by his mother, and told he was a monster. Now, unlike human babies, in mythology, the creatures are aware at birth. So he had to carry this. First thing he heard was he was a monster with him. So it had to shape his self-image.
Thank goodness
And then
Asclepius came along to adopt him, right?
yeah,
For those of
yeah.
you that don't know that part of the story, Chiron had help. Yes.
But so if you think about it, imagine you're this creature that your whole life up until this point, you don't even want to look at your reflection in a river because you'll see that it's a monster. And here was this creature who not only shows you unjudged, non-judgmental love, but thinks you are so beautiful that she transforms herself into the same form to be with you. Can you imagine the healing to his psychology that must have taken place? And that's the story that helps define the Chiron Chariklo relationship.
And that's beautiful. And it makes me think of two things. One, because it's an element of the idea of shape shifting and how we can shape shift for those we love is one thing.
Yes, and I have Neptune in the seventh house. I've done that to my detriment many times.
Do you think it has anything to do with the idea of neural mirroring as well? When you're very close, when you're with someone all the time, you begin to do some neural mirroring of one another, or almost develop a telepathic bond?
Yeah, yeah. I've had closer telepathic connections with friends than I have had with lovers, though. Interestingly, I had a friend who was a Scorpio with a Scorpio rising, and whenever he was emotional, I would actually see in my mind the images that were going through his brain when he was emotional. One time, we were in a group, and suddenly everyone turned and looked at me with surprise. And I said, "What's the matter?" And they said, "You said God bless you before he sneezed." I heard him sneeze in my head. Yes, yeah.
That's really cool. What about the composite chart? Have you looked at that when their Chiron and Chariklo are in major relationship
No,
in a
no,
composite chart?
I've looked at them in composite charts on occasion, but I haven't actually looked at them in relation to each other in composite charts. Um, see, I use composite charts, but I don't use them. I haven't made a lot of research on them.
What orbs do you sort of use roughly? You don't have to commit yourself to anything, but do you tend to go like 1 degree or under 5 degrees? Everyone has their own idea of orbs.
Yeah. Well, when I first started researching it, I gave tight orbs. That was the whole point. You can't get a flavor of something with a wide orb. But I tend to give it about to a personal planet or an angle, maybe about 5 degrees, maybe 7 or 8 if it's the sun or moon. And we're talking about major aspects now, and I'm not talking about semi-squares or quintiles or anything.
Okay. Dale O'Brien and Joyce Mason, if we go back a generation, used to teach and lecture about Chiron quite a bit. I think it was called Doc Chiron's Traveling Medicine Show, if I recall
Yes.
correctly. And of course, the traveling medicine shows were a fixture of the 19th century that most people don't even realize unless they've seen The Wizard of Oz, the 1939 movie, a great many times, because of course the wizard was originally the doctor for a traveling medicine show. Um, were you familiar with their research? And I know Dale wrote an article for me for NCGR Journal on Astrolocality, where he outlined his work with Chiron astrolocality lines, astrocartography or astrolocality. Either term is okay. Do you ever put Chiron and Chariklo lines in ACG or astrolocality maps?
Okay. Um, there's several questions in here, so
Start with
I'll
Dale
answer
and
them.
Joyce. Start with Dale and
Okay.
Joyce.
Yeah, I've known them both for a while. I've actually at one time I met Joyce in person, and I've corresponded with Dale. Dale received the newsletter from my Chiron group and stuff, and so he became Dr. Chiron, and I became Mr. Chiron over time. But I think we both chose our names for ourselves. I don't think either one of us was given that name by our peers. Um, so yeah, Dale was very, very astute observer. He saw a lot of things, and so I think that he was definitely one of the pioneers in Chiron research. Joyce, Joyce was remarkable in that she would pick up things, uh, connections that other people had missed. I remember she came up with this amazing article on Chiron and Pluto, where she called them the Comet Brothers. And she showed in the article all the things Chiron and Pluto had in common, that they both have highly eccentric orbits. Pluto will stay in Scorpio for about 11 to 13 years, but it'll stay in Taurus for about 35 years, right? And Chiron will stay in Aries for 8 years, but in Libra for a year and a half. So they have that similar long, stretched out orbit, zooming through certain signs and lagging in other signs. And Chiron is basically it's the largest comet nucleus that scientists have ever discovered. It's one that hasn't turned into a comet yet. It was captured by the outer planets before it was turned into a comet. I asked AI the other day if it'll ever be a comet, and they said yes, but it'll be several million years from now. And when it does, it'll be the brightest comet mankind has ever seen, because it's 10,000 times the mass of Halley's Comet. That gives you an idea of how big Chiron is. And Pluto, while it's not a comet, is mostly ice. It's frozen. It's a frozen world. So in that respect, it shares the makeup of Chiron. And so she found the connection, and she gave a lot of ways where they were both had similar influences in the chart, where they complemented each other. If you ever get a chance to find it, I think it's still available on the web, a couple places. I think she said Chiron and Pluto, the Comet Brothers. I think that was what it was called.
Okay,
But,
I'm gonna look for it actually. Yes, that sounds great because it's been many years since I've even heard her name sort of mentioned. So I don't know if she's with us or not still, but
well, last time I had any communication with her was about 5 years ago, I think. So I don't know. She may still. Some of us oldie but goodies, we hang on.
right. Well, what about Chiron and Chariklo ACG lines? Anything to say about that?
Yeah. I haven't tried character those map lines yet, but I've been putting Chiron in there for years. As a matter of fact,
Don't you have a Chiron line running near Perth? Didn't you tell me that? Yes.
Yeah. I just when Jim Lewis was still in charge of his ACG, and he was, you could buy an astrocartography map from him with a 2-page little booklet of interpretations, and I'll tell you a story about that one too. But I asked him if he could put Chiron into it, and he did. So Chiron was in astrocartography after my dialoguing with Jim Lewis. So that's how long it's been since I've looked at Chiron in the lines. The closest astrocartography line in my chart for Perth, which is the biggest city in Western Australia, and the closest one to where I live, is my Chiron on my IC line. Now, for those who are not familiar, the IC is the lowest point in the chart. It's the opposite point from the MC, which is usually associated with the midheaven, and it's the foundation. So I moved from the US, where Chiron is in the 10th house and the highest planet in my chart, to Australia, where Chiron is at the bottom of my chart and my foundation, and I have built a lot here in Australia. I've actually seen things from an entirely different perspective. And so it was here I wrote my second book on Chiron, with an awful lot of stuff that I've learned since I moved to Australia.
Okay, good. Have you worked much with the dimension of declination when it comes to delineating Chiron and Chariklo in charts? And what, if anything, has your research revealed? Are there charts you've encountered where Chiron and Chariklo are parallel or contra-parallel to one another or to other factors such as Venus and the lights? We can break it up.
Okay. I'm sorry to say that I really haven't done much research here, so I don't have anything I can really share about this.
That's fine.
I have looked at the declinations for Chiron because for years I've used Solar Fire for my astrology software, and one of the things you can do is you can tell Solar Fire, show me a list of the positions, and it will give the positions, and one of the columns is the declination.
Yep.
And you can see whether visually, you can see whether there's any parallels. You can also see if a body is out of bounds, more than 23 degrees. And Chiron can frequently be out of bounds, which may lend a little bit to its being this inconvenient benefic.
And maverick nature, right?
Yes, yes. So, do you know where the word maverick came from?
Cattle branding?
Yes.
Well,
Um,
cattle, we a little more than that. You can explain it. I won't.
so nowadays, probably still, but in the early days of the ranchers in the West in the U.S., uh, the cattle ranchers branded their cows at a very young age, so that if any of them escaped from their pen or whatever you call it, the corral, uh, and got to somebody else's property, that person would, in good faith, return it rather than keep it. He couldn't actually keep it and sell it to somebody else because it had your brand on it. So that was the par. That was the standard. Well, Samuel Maverick decided that he was going to buck the trend and not brand his own cattle. In his mind, the idea was that if any cattle were on his property without a brand, they were his, which in a way means that if somebody had a calf who they hadn't branded yet escape from their corral and end up in Samuel's, it would be his, and there would be nothing that anybody could do about it. But this gave the word maverick the meaning someone who does not wear the brand of the herd. Yeah, which is Chiron. It's the
Someone that stands out from the herd.
yeah. How does that phrase go? Um, I listen to the beat of a different drum.
Yep. Walk to the beat of a different drummer. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what can our workshop attendees hope to learn from your workshop very briefly about themselves or about their relationships?
Well, okay. The first half of the workshop is going to be introducing Chiron and exploring it, introducing Chariklo and exploring it. So you're going to get a good knowledge base of what these bodies will mean in your charts. The second half, I will be actually looking at the participants' charts. Anybody who wants their chart looked at, they'll provide the information beforehand, and I'll get to as many as I can. We'll actually look at the house position and the of both Chiron and Chariklo in their charts, what it means to them, and if they're significant. Let's say they have Chariklo conjunct Mars or Chiron square Mercury. If they're significant, also explore that aspect or aspects in their chart as well. So everybody has Chiron and Chariklo somewhere in the charts. So everybody will get an understanding, at least from that perspective, even if they're not making major aspects. And so one of the things you'll learn is about your wounds. You'll learn that how your wounds are, at least in part, due to a fiction. Like just think of a parent who is constantly berating the child, saying, "You're stupid." So the child grows up thinking they're stupid. The child may not be stupid. That's a fiction, but you believe that, and that's part of the wound. So helping to understand that some of the things that you believe are your faults, or they're your problems, your what's wrong with you, is based on fiction, and what it takes to feel safe enough for you to face these, so that you can actually blow the fiction away and see the truth about yourself. And the kind of person, what somebody who has a Chariklo aspect to your chart will do for you to help you feel safe.
Great, amazing. Okay, good answer. Have you found any particular qualities or personality traits associated with having Chiron or Chariklo angular in a chart, like conjunct one of the angles? Brief answer, that's all. Talk about it more at the workshop.
Well, Chiron on the close to the ascendant, long ago, I took the name of Heinlein's book as the description of this. The person is always feel like they're a stranger in a strange land. They always see things through a lens that is so different than all the people around them that they just don't fit. Why does everybody see such and such when I look at it? That's not what I see, and it's even to the point where I have seen some people where I can look at them. It hasn't been 100%, but I can look at somebody and say, I think you have Chiron rising, and about 75% of the time I've been right, just from their looks, their eyes. They look like they're here, but they're not here.
Kind of like a changeling, sort of.
Yeah. It's
There's something liminal about their eyes. Is there something otherworldly? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's another way to look at it is, in some ways, they're like visitors to this plane rather than actually, a full-fledged member.
I remember that play by Gore Vidal, Visit to a Small Planet or something, right?
Yeah. Chariklo, angular, especially conjunct the ascendant, but angular. This is a person who, just by being themselves, can make the people around them feel relaxed enough to open up to be themselves. It's a great thing for a therapist who's in the business to really want to help people. They're good listeners because they encourage the people to speak, and the people know that they're actually being listened to.
Thanks. That's really good. That's really interesting, because this is not information I know or have learned previously. Now, if I had either an afflicted Chariklo or Chiron in my chart, how might that manifest on a very general level, if there even is such a thing as an afflicted or beleaguered Chiron or Chariklo in a birth chart?
All right. One of the most intriguing things in the early days of studying Chiron I discovered is that quite often in the trine of Chiron, things were not that happy. I found when, for example, if somebody had a close trine of Chiron to Neptune, that it was way too easy for the Neptune illusions and stuff to flow over them and to just like the dam would come out and they, just illusions and stuff. It was way too easy. Quite often with Chiron and Chariklo, trines are an easy way for the Chiron to interact with the planet, but it may not be pleasant. It may not be something you really want to happen because it's just there are no stop gaps. That if the dam comes down, the water is going to wash over you, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. It's a trine. It's a flowing. The squares. I've never seen squares as being a negative. My first clue that they were negative long before Chiron discovered was somebody gave me a research project where squares were very heavily represented in the charts of self-made millionaires.
Okay.
And the idea is that you have obstacles, you don't shy away from trying to overcome them. So Chiron and square is like the same thing, except it's amplified in that you feel pushed to try to overcome the obstacle. Chiron will not let you just sit on your laurels. It's you've got to do something with the square. So I don't see it ever being a malefic aspect. The hard aspects just means there's this need to really put an effort into work, and with Chiron, you want to do it because you want to be healed.
Okay, thanks. That answers that. Now, here's something you may never have been asked by anyone, but what about Chiron and Chariklo in the mundane charts of nations? What could we deduce about the national character of a country or a company, as in a corporation, that say has Chariklo rising or Chiron on the MC, or is this research still waiting to be investigated?
Yeah, I haven't researched Chariklo in mundane charts and country charts, but I do have a section of my first book on Chiron in the charts of countries. I used the Book of World Charts and put Chiron in several of them. So I do have a section in there. Let me see if for a second. I'm going to see if I can find a chart here. Where are you?
That would be great.
There we go.
And funny, it leads me to my next question, so that's perfect.
There we go.
Do you need me to help let you share the screen?
Yeah, so as soon as I get the chart, I'll
Yes.
tell you. I have so many charts that when I do a search, it takes forever to finish the search.
I know. And I know how many charts and how many groups you have and how many research groups. Oh, my goodness.
Well, one of the things that happened to me years ago, I used to have software called Astro Data Bank, which is all of the charts for the Astro Data Bank are now online, but there used to actually be software where you could bring up the charts in the software where you can ask the software how many people have Chiron in this house, and it would search for you. And so I have all of those original Astro Data Bank charts in my Solar Fire. That's a lot of charts. Whoops. Come on. Here we go. All right. Yeah. See if you can share this. I want to share the screen.
Right. So
Yeah.
all you have to do, I think, is press the green arrow that says share. I've already enabled multiple participants.
All right. I got to see if it'll. There we go. All right. So this is one of the most widely used charts for Australia.
All
All
right,
right.
here we go. Yeah.
And if you look in the eighth house, you'll see what planet Chiron is very close to. Uh,
Mercury.
it's right. So this is an example of Chiron, Mercury in a country's charts. Now, Chiron, uh, quite often you'll find will represent people that have things done to them through no fault of their own. So, you know, they're not responsible for something that happened to them, but what happened to them, they had to live their lives because of that. If lightning strikes a tree and the tree gets burned on the top and sends off a side shoot, which then becomes the new tree, it's not the tree's fault. You know what I mean? Well, one of the things that I think Chiron Mercury in the Australia's chart is because the founders of Chiron, founders of Australia, the majority of them were prisoners. They were sent to Australia, uh, as prisoners, uh, to give them a chance to get a new start. Not all of them were actually guilty of what they were accused of, but that doesn't matter. If the judge says you're guilty, then you're guilty. And I think that the essence of Chiron Mercury in Australia's chart is part of its mindset, in that we are the dregs. Originally we were the
Originally the
refuse.
convict country. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Mercury, as you know, was the god of thieves, for example. You know, yeah.
And
So
isn't it interesting, Zane, that Chiron's so near the ninth house cusp, and Australia, not counting the first people, Chiron, right there in the ninth house, Australia was a nation of emigres, right? Emigrants, right? Forced
yes,
immigrants
and
in many cases, as you say.
yeah, forced immigrants, and it's also 3 degrees away from Jupiter, so it's definitely this, uh, you know, in the philosophy. Another thing about it, I think, it shows up quite often in the attitude of Australians to each other. Now, in America, from time to time, I remember good friends would lovingly call each other nasty things, but it was it wasn't something that you saw all over the place, and it wasn't something that you ever saw on television. When I came to Australia, one of the things I noticed is that everybody calls their mate the most horrible things, and there's no insult intended. Something that would sound like an insult anywhere else, the Australians, that's just how it's their sign of brotherly love. They just, I think that's also part of this Chiron thing. Um, and
That's really interesting.
yeah,
How does, now how in your mind is your first book, which for most of us old timers is a cherished book because they were handmade, right, by
yeah,
Al Morrison, the first printing. It
yes.
was called Chiron, Essence and Application, A View from the
It,
Bridge. Is that what it was called?
it was called uh, Essence and Application: A View from Chiron.
A View from Chiron, right. And yet your second book on Chiron, there's several decades of delineation, research, and wisdom teaching separating the two. In your mind, how do you compare the two? Or are they like bookends for your overall career in a way?
All right. So my first book was uh, after only a few years. Right, Chiron was discovered in '77, and it was the first half of the '80s when I published this book. So I didn't even have a full decade of research when I wrote the book. Um, I divided the book into two sections. Half of it was a lot of theorizing, and I looked at a lot of things that and related them to Chiron in the world. Like, for example, I have one thing in there where I talk about how the dandelion is considered a weed in America, and that uh, people want these nice green lawns, and they put poison to kill the dandelions, and yet every single part of the dandelion is healthy to ingest. It's at a high concentration of things like vitamin C. Uh, the flowers are edible. The leaves are edible. The roots are edible. You can make a coffee substitute by roasting the roots. So uh, I talked about how uh, this is, in some ways, this is like this. You have to think outside of the box and look at dandelions in a new way. And this is a Chiron thing. So a lot of the first half is my personal theorizing based on the research, and the second half is the astrology based on my findings and other people's. My book that came out in 2022, I think,
And
called
say the
Chiron
title
Healer.
again, just in case people haven't heard of it.
It's called Chiron Healer and Homemaker.
And you can get, I
Uh,
bought my
ba-
copy on Amazon, so I know it's out there.
yes, and that Amazon is my publisher. Only because I didn't know anybody in publishing, and I understood that most astrology books, you know, the authors don't make a lot of money, so I figured I might as well get as much as I can out of it. Amazon takes a percentage and gives me the rest, you know. But that book is based on everything that I have pretty much learned in the past 40 some years. So it's starts off building on the foundation of the first book. There are things in the first book that I have since changed my mind about. For example, one time I thought Chiron might rule Libra. I even had some language. What's the study of language? I can't remember. I
Entomology.
even, yeah. I even had some exploration into certain words. Like, for example, there's a word called zugon, which means a link or a binding, and it's from where the zygote comes from. That word, and I even showed Chiron's possible connection between that and that connection with Libra, which you know, in some cultures, Libra was called the equivalent of the linking the zygon. But I don't believe Chiron rules Libra anymore. I have an entirely different perspective on Chiron as ruling now. So,
Well, I guess we have all these dwarf planets now too. So, in terms of for a while, there were people trying to come up with rulership systems that even before we learned Trans-Pluto was an astronomical artifact, you had people trying to put both Chiron and Trans-Pluto into the rulership system. So,
yeah. Well, you know,
could you stop sharing, Zane? If you'd stop sharing, I'll pull something up. And
yeah. I did want to mention one thing about the rulerships, and this goes back to something that I got from Joyce Mason, since you mentioned her, right? Joyce Mason expressed in one of her writings the idea that Chiron, because it's not a planet, but because it's an active uh, body. It actually melts the surface ice and refreezes. It's more of a process. And she came up with the idea that Chiron is the process that starts in Libra, goes to starts in Virgo. I'm sorry, starts in Virgo, goes to Libra and Scorpio, and completes in Sagittarius. And I have embraced that. That was Joyce's original writing, but I have embraced that. I see that as well. I'll just give you a very quick interpretation of that, and then you can mention what you were going to mention. So let's say you have some health problem that's nagging at you, but you ignore it, and it starts getting to the point where you can't ignore it anymore. You have to try and figure out what's going on. So you look at and try to analyze the situation. What is the causing this problem? So that's Virgo. You recognize consciously that you have a problem and you try to seek help. You try using your own mind to figure it out, and you're too close to the problem. So you have to step outside of yourself. You have to go to someone else. You may go to a doctor, a guru, a therapist, psychologist, a book on self-help. You may meditate and talk to your angels, but whatever, you step outside of yourself in order to look for a solution, and that's Libra. And the doctor, the guru, or whatever will give you a suggestion of something you can do to solve the problem. Maybe if your problem is that you had a small heart attack, maybe the doctor will tell you, stop smoking and lose weight. Or maybe if it's a psychological problem, the doctor will say, here's what I'd like you to try. Whatever it is, you have a possible solution, something to begin the healing. You have a choice to either try this, and if it's valid, it might actually help you, or ignore it, and your condition can get worse. This is the Scorpio. Do something to make a major change, or don't do it and possibly end up, dying from the problem. If you follow the regimen, whatever it was, and it was the correct one for healing the issue, you now see the world through a larger perspective, and you can then help others who are where you have been, and you can share your knowledge. And this is the Sagittarius. That's when you become the teacher of what you have learned. So that's the Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Chiron process that I believe in, and that I got from Joyce Mason.
Yes, because I remember it was Joyce and I think Dale that really were advocates for Virgo. Yeah. Can you see the screen, Zane?
Yes. Yes.
So tell me a little bit. I know Al Morrison helped to design the glyph for Chiron, and we really see it was really very much.
Okay. No. He didn't.
No, he did not. I'm wrong. Okay, please correct me.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So this is the story. Al had something that was called the Congress of Astrological Organizations, and he had a meeting of the groups. Several people were attending, and they were actually voting on a symbol for Chiron. And a lot of people submitted their images, their glyphs. And the one that we are looking at now was the one that was voted by the most amount of people at this democratic thing. Now, you could say it wasn't democratic because only the people in the group were invited to vote, but then only the people who are registered voters in the U.S. can vote in the elections, So it was a vote that got that symbol rather than one person. And the artist, I used to know his name, but I can't remember, but it's not anybody I ever met.
I mean, it really is the perfect symbol, I think, for Chiron because the whole thing about the key but I had forgotten how wonderfully um complementary the Chariklo symbol is to the original Chiron symbol. And how
Yes.
many years passed before the second symbol, the Chariklo symbol, was created?
Oh,
And there are other symbols people use for Chariklo, by the way, but this is the one I like.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's even originally when this symbol for Chiron was voted on, there was another symbol that was promoted by a Canadian astrologer, Malcolm Dean. He was promoting it, but it looked like an old cattle brand, and it was not that popular. Um, I don't know the exact year that the symbol for Chariklo came out, but it was many years because it was not till 1992 that Pholas was discovered, and Chariklo was after that. You know, why are you looking at Steins?
I just wondered if you felt any kinship with this particular asteroid. The closest I could come to Zane and Stein for a personal name asteroid.
Oh, you know, many years ago when I lived in Philadelphia, I was one of the founders of a astrology group that no longer exists. Uh, but we met regularly, and one of the other people who was a member of this group was called Jacob Schwartz.
Yes, he did great work. Oh my God.
And Jacob made that his life work, looking at the personal name asteroids. He even published a book, which I still have, where he listed all the named asteroids that were known at that time, where the name came from, and sometimes more information than that. Uh, and the I don't know exactly when, but it was quite a few years afterwards. You got all my favorite people here.
That's right. Do you have anything else you'd like to say about your friendship with Brian Marsden? We're going to start winding down, and I want to thank everyone that has stayed with us for the entire length of the interview. I just wanted to nail some facts down. So we have here's a picture of Al Morrison looking extremely acerbic. Uh, tell me a little bit before you tell us about Brian. Tell me a little bit about your friendship with Debbie Kempton Smith, if you would.
Yes. So um, I got to. I met Debbie originally through Al, right? Um, and
By the way, I
yep,
mean, the background story is her book, Secrets from a Stargazer's Notebook, was originally supposed to be a biography of Al H. Morrison that she was contracted to write from Bantam, but Al didn't want anyone writing his biography. So it turned into this mass market, best selling book, gateway drug to astrology, Secrets from a Stargazer's Notebook.
yeah. So I saw Debbie as a friend. She would, I would go to New York and she would take me after dinner. One year she threw me a birthday party, a surprise birthday party. She would come to wherever I happened to be living. She had a particular fondness to my pet iguana. She used to love to come to see my iguana. But so I saw her as a friend outside of astrology as much as I saw her involved in astrology. But so one day I get a phone call from Debbie. Now Debbie didn't usually use the phone, but I got a phone call from Debbie, and she asked if she could interview me for her book that she was writing. So I said sure. So she came to Philadelphia. She was friends with the owner of a bookstore in Philadelphia that had a back room. She got the permission. We went into the back room. She took out her tape recorder and she asked me questions on Chiron. And the results of that interview became her Chiron chapter in her book.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Yeah.
And then later on, she republished the book, a revised version, and she had asked me a few more questions that weren't in the original.
The book
Yeah.
that had
So
the little add-on chapter on exoplanets,
yes.
I
Yeah.
had really hoped she would write another book. And when I contacted her in 2009 to write an article for the Astrolocality Journal, she told me she was working on another book, but I have no idea
It
who
doesn't
ended up with her
surprise me.
papers.
It doesn't surprise me. When Al was in the last couple of years of his life, he didn't believe that he was going to be dying. He actually thought that he was just going to keep on going for years, and he was actually contemplating putting together a book himself. And he always said, "I want to keep on being your publisher." To me, it doesn't surprise me that that Debbie was working on another book, but I never saw even a rudimentary manuscript.
Yeah.
So you asked, and this picture of Al, he's always reminded me of a character from Strangers in Strange Land. To me, Al Morrison is Jubal.
I knew you were going to say Jubal. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder how many younger people have read Stranger in a Strange Land. Now, I don't ever see anyone reading it, but it was, this was a book everyone read in the 60s and 70s, right?
Yes. Yes. I have some Warner Brothers still. Um, so the story about Dr. Marsden, which is probably a good way to finish up here.
Yep.
So I have been corresponding with him for several years, and he was always giving me things, not charging me, and he knew I was an astrologer, and he was always, whatever I asked for, he would provide. And he was like my rich uncle, and a benefactor. So one day I wrote to him, I sent him a letter, and I said, you've done so much for me. I'd like to do something for you. How would you like me to, if I do your chart, so maybe you can see how the other half lives? That was what I said. And he wrote back and he says, well, I appreciate the thought. I think you know me too well. You would find it hard to be objective about what you said. But I have a suggestion if you're willing to do that. How about if I send you the birth date of two people, a man and a woman, and don't tell you who they are, and you do their charts, and then I tell you afterwards what how accurate you were. So how can you say no to something like that? So this is back when I typed charts up on a typewriter, and so I spent a lot of work trying to give really good analysis. So I only knew one was a man and one was a woman. That's it. So I sent these two charts in an envelope to him, the reports. And about a week and a half later, I got an email. I mean, a letter from Al. I'm getting tired, from Dr. Marsden. And he wrote back that first he thanked me for them. And then he said, the chart for the female was for my wife. And she said you were everything you said was true. She was right. She said it was right on, but she was not being objective. However, the one for the man was for my colleague, Daniel Green. And I must grudgingly admit that you were about 85% accurate. All right, now I don't know about you, but when I look at my weather report on the television, the weather forecasters don't get 85% accuracy. But this is from an astronomer who didn't believe in astrology.
Who would have been more skeptical than most perhaps. Right. Yeah. It's a great score. You actually, I mean, you started out as sort of a professional level, but you actually became good friends with him, I think.
Well, we became friends. We only met in person once. And this goes back to Debbie. I got in the mail. Debbie sent me. She had arranged for me to be invited to something that was happening at the New York Museum of Natural History, I think it was. There was going to be a panel discussion on should Pluto be a planet. Yeah, basically, should Pluto be demoted? And Dr. Marsden was there, Alan Stern was there, David Levy was there, Jane Liu was there, and I think one other person. So they were all on this panel, and I got a ticket, so had one of the front row seats, and I watched the whole panel. And afterwards, I went up and I introduced myself, and I could feel warmth. It's like two old friends meeting again rather than meeting in person for the first time. And I have a photograph somebody took of the two of us standing together. I had this very weird grin on my face because I was unbelievably happy. But so that was the only time I actually met him in person. But
I see. I thought you guys had met in person more.
no.
Let a couple of just wrap up questions. Okay, what new things are you working on these days?
Well, I'm working on a lot of the bodies that are out past Pluto. I've got a talk I'm preparing on three bodies that were named after not ancient mythology, but beings in mythology of 20th century writers.
Really?
Yes. There's one body called Borasisi that was named after a god in the mythology of Kurt Vonnegut's book, where he talks about this. What is it? He talks about this character named Bokanon who makes up a religion based on lies, and Borasisi is the god of the sun. And so that's one of the bodies. Then there's two other bodies. There's Mani and Valdar, if I remember correctly, and these are a god and goddess in the works of Tolkien.
And there are actual dwarf planets named after these fictional gods. I'm out of the loop. Uh-oh.
So they were the only difference between these and the ones named after ancient mythologies is the time factor, because the ancient mythologies came from the human minds drawing on the collective unconscious. These came from the 20th century, but they're still relevant. And so I'm going to be giving a talk for my local group on these three bodies at some point. And the other thing I'm working on is I'm doing a lot of work on Halley's Comet. Now, Halley's Comet last was seen in 1986, and I may not be alive 76 years after that.
None of us may be, right?
But Halley's Comet exists in your chart, even if it's not visible in the sky. And you can put it in your chart. You can select it as an option with the astro.com. If you know how to do it, you can add it to SolarFire. I'm trying to get the people that program Astro Gold for Mac to add Halley's Comet to that. And I'm doing a lot of research, and I'm finding that is really significant, especially the Halley's Mars conjunctions. So that's another thing I'm working on.
That sounds truly fascinating. I hope you'll let me know when that work is published. You did write a great essay for the Geocosmic Journal on Eris. And is Eris something you must have in your chart now, or is it still sort of an occasional add-on?
No, well, I tend to put Chiron and Eris in every chart that I look at. It's you ever hear somebody say, once you see something, you can't unsee it.
Yep.
Yeah. So my ex-wife, who is now one of my dear friends, and I help her with her business she has, which is called the Astrology Collective. She has Eris conjunct her ascendant, and if you talk about somebody that was put on Earth to shake up the status quo, just look at any group she's ever belonged to, and you'll see Eris at work.
That sounds like Eris. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I hope we'll see you all at Zane's workshop on February 21st. I've posted the information several places during this interview. So we hope to see you there so you can have one of the leading astrological figures. You can be in a workshop with one of the leading astrological figures of the 20th and 21st century, because you now know, after stoically enduring a long interview, the extent to which Zane has influenced the understanding and use of Chiron in our nativities and our software. Please come. And Zane, my last question for you, and you may not even have any thoughts on this. If the trend to harness AI as a tool for astrological research continues apace, do you have any thoughts about how this may change our field or alter the practice of astrology itself?
Okay. So my feeling about AI is the same thing I felt about computers and astrology. It's a tool. And if used as a tool, it's a great asset to this astrology. If you let the computer think for you, or if you let AI think for you, then you might as well leave astrology completely, because that's not what they're there for. So if we can tap the potential of AI to crunch numbers, to find connections real quick that might take us months to find, to put the pieces together for us that we might take years to put together. That's a fantastic use of AI. But if we say to ask AI to interpret a chart for us and then we sit back and let it do it, I think that's totally wrong and a misuse.
Thank you, Zane. On behalf of the Florida North Atlantic Chapter of the NCGR, thanks for taking the time to speak with us, and we'll look forward to your workshop. And I'm going to say the date in case someone's watching this interview at another time. The workshop in question was on February 21st, 2026. And if you scroll back, you'll even see the chart, which has lots of centaurs in it, for the talk starting at 9 a.m. in the Fort Lauderdale area. And thank you again, Zane. Any closing remarks?
Yeah, just basically anybody who's going to come to that workshop, if they want their chart to be looked at, please make sure that you send your birth data either to the Florida group or to me at least 2 days before the event. And when you give the birth data, give the name of the month, because in some countries, the first digit is the month, and other countries, the middle digit is the month. And so make sure if you're born in December, you don't say 12, you say December.
Right, that's good. And I forgot to ask, are you still giving readings? Could someone contact you and get a reading from you?
Yeah, I do readings on occasion. It's I only do a few a year, but yes, I do a reading, and I have a website which is zanestein.com/ Centurion Astrology .htm.
I have it
You
on the
just look up.
screen. I have it on the screen right now.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's there on the screen as someone's watching this.
Yes, it is.
All right, then. Perfect. We'll see you on the 21st.
Ciao.
Ciao.